From one of the richest cities to one of the nation's poorest, Key West experienced early on the best of times and the worst of times. During the Great Depression, the city faced bankruptcy as two of its main industries, cigar and sponge, were no longer a prominent force in the city's economy. While the nation's average unemployment rate during the Depression was 30%, 80% of Key West's population was on relief. The federal government was considering moving the residents to Tampa. During the Great Depression, President Roosevelt created several programs to create jobs and help the economy. One such program, the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, sent Florida's Administrator Julius Stone to Key West in 1934. After walking up and down the streets lined with historic homes and feeling the warm summer sun on his back, it occurred to Stone to develop Key West as a tourist destination, or the Bermuda of America, as he phrased it. In July of 1934, the city of Key West surrendered its governing power to the state, which made national headlines. And so began the cleanup and beautification of Key West in preparation for the first tourist season, which was less than 6 months away. Many Key Westers, happy to have a WPA job, spent their days raking the seaweed from the beaches, hauling 10,000 pounds of garbage, planting poincianas along Whitehead and mahoganies on Simonton, building cabanas on Rest Beach, forming a hospitality band, and building the Sea Aquarium. The government also distributed paint to encourage residents to paint their somber homes various shades of pink and lavender. Overnight, the town went from a gloomy grayish appearance to a rainbow of pastel colors. WPA artists were brought down to capture the culture and various Key West scenes and art, which would be used in promotional materials nationwide. And WPA writers were hired to write news articles and guidebooks to promote the Bermuda of America. The number of tourists increased the first year, and the number of people on relief started to decline. Although Key West was one of the poorest cities in America during the Great Depression, its tropical climate and abundance of seafood and tropical fruit trees helped to alleviate the pains of desperate times. But was this enough to sustain a family of 8? The only ones who really know what life was like were, of course, the ones who lived and survived the Great Depression in Key West.
During the Depression time, things were so bad here in Key West. It was over the whole country, but Key West was terrible. If they say, you want to do this job? Yeah, sure, I gotta do it. I need it.
My dad, I can remember on Saturday night, he'd go down to Arches Grocery on Fleming Street, and he'd get our groceries. Then he'd get 5 bags of groceries, I remember this, and then he'd leave and go and put the groceries out to different people's houses.
Crawfish we don't want to see. Fish we don't want to see because we eat that every day.
They would sit down and eat their grits and grunts on the porch. They eat the cake on the porch, and they would conversate on the porch.
Well, I used to go sometimes on Rest Beach and keep on going to the end where the wall started, where the boulevard started, and I'd look out there and I said, this is the end of the world, not a car. You wouldn't see nobody. You see the birds flying around the coast there, and you look silence, a complete silence, like if you were in the desert. That was Key West under the Depression.
During the day, the whole place was ours to go anywhere we wanted to.
A lot of things were not discussed before children, and we were out playing. I mean, they were hard times, and hard for really hard, especially people with large families. They had a real struggle trying to make ends meet. As I said, we were among the fortunate ones.
There was poverty here, there's no doubt about it, but everybody seemed to me helped each other. That was one of the wonderful things about Key West. It was a community.
That was the old Key West, the one I knew.
Key West was a different place then.
And let me tell you this, that was a hell of a days, but it was a good old days.
You had to take a pauper's oath in order to get a welfare or WPA job. That required you to say, you solemnly swear that I have no job, no money, no property, and no prospect of getting any of those things.
We used to live on South Street. My father used to work in the WPA because we were poor. He used to make $1 a day. For 7 kids, my mama 8 and my father 9.
My father was a bandmaster, and he was a cigar finisher, and he had an orchestra. Oh, he worked hard. He had those 3 jobs, and he had 7 children to feed, and he did a lot of teaching at home. He taught all instruments.
My father was working on the WPA, which was $14 every 2 weeks. At the same time, he owned a schooner, the U.S. Josephine, which he burnt coal, brought it to Key West to sell. He also brought in fruit for the various stores.
After the 1935 storm, the insurance agency moved into the house. We lived at 707 South Street. And even the accounting firm became where there was no employees. And he was also a city commissioner. My dad was an accountant, and he put together the first, I guess, paperwork for the city to redo their bonds so they could consolidate their indebtedness. They couldn't even collect taxes because the merchants and people couldn't pay the taxes. We have to remember there was very little property taxes on homes in those days, and most of it came out of commercial. So they issued scrip to the employees of the city, and then the employees could take that and buy groceries and things with it, clothing, and then the merchants that they took the script in would pay their taxes with it.
My father had a grocery store. He was very successful. For one thing, I remember they took script. The city issued script in place of payments, and the script wasn't worth almost the paper it was printed on. And in those days, everyone had credit.
Well, I was born in the house that now houses the guest house of the Mermaid and the Alligator, across from St. Mary's on Truman. And then we moved out here in December of 1930. My father was a cigar maker, and he worked at Gatto's factory on Simonton Street. Mr. Eduardo Gatto Sr. was my father's uncle. By 1934, he was working with the WPA. He was not a fisherman, so that was the only thing he could do. You made $7.50 a week. I think they worked 3 days a week. That way they were able to spread the money around.
She worked, it was a place, it's not in Columbia Laundry, and she was a presser there. Very hard work, very, very hot in there. And I kind of got to me. My grandfather, he was a cook. He cooked in the Navy in World War I, and he used to cook on the cable boat there. I don't know if you remember. No, you wouldn't remember what I'm talking about. And then he worked for Norborn Thompson's. You heard of the Thompson? They owned everything at one time. They owned the Coca-Cola company, the ice plant. And so my grandfather, he made his living cooking. He was a cook, but he was wise. There was a family, a white family, the Lowe's. They wanted to get rid of that property through Galveston Lane, and they let him have it very reasonable. And he bought so much of their property till I think they gave him 1 or 2 of them free.
My father was a cab driver, and his post of driving his car was at the Trumbull Point at the railroad station. The railroad closed in September of 1935. After the hurricane, they had to close. There was no more railroad going up to the Keys. And my father found that there was no customers, so he had to leave that. At the golf course, they cut down trees, and they did some landscaping work there, and it was built at that time. They built golf courses in Stock Island.
He worked for the Navy Yard until they closed. He drove the dray, like today's trucks. He took the garbage and different things he had to do with the truck. When President Taft came here, he drove him around the city and whatnot. I think before my time, he used to deliver ice around the city, because then they didn't have Frigidaires.
We moved around a lot because these old houses, old conch houses, was cheap rent. And when you had 8 children, you got to look for something cheap. Even in those days, they were good at it though, the Spongemans. We'd be out sometimes several weeks. My dad fainted digging ditches because the Greeks had ruined the sponge.
He always had an interest in art, even when he was a child.
when he saw that there was an opportunity for him to volunteer his time, he most likely volunteered his time in something that he enjoyed doing, which was drawing. He was born in Key West, and my mom both. My grandfather and my grandmother came over in the late 1800s. I remember he did anything from driving the local city bus to being a ticket taker at one of the theaters. And he did have a little grocery store at one time when I was born. However, it was during the Depression time. My dad had a soft heart.
Townsend Morgan was waiting for us at the dock and brought us home to this house. And we came down to visit him. His daughter was my best friend, and he was raving about this place. And my father was a lawyer, and he had a big law firm, and he wasn't needed as much there. And so he came down here and he fell in love with the place, and that was it. You learned very quickly who people were when you got down here. And everybody tried their best to make people feel welcome here, and there were plays going on, there was music going on, there was always something. There were so many talented people here.
He wrote and then acted out plays on the stage of the St. Carlos, and it would answer a lot of questions about the gossip going on about who did what with who and so on. Marty would make these out into a play in a respectable manner, of course, and it would be very comical. And they would finally find out, oh, so that's what's been going on.
He's perpetuated that particular Key West culture in a way that no other community has ever been done.
This, was a great place for people who had any art or any instinctive qualities toward it. This was a wonderful place to try things out, and it was all inspiring to me and to us Northerners.
I was inventing independent studies by dropping out of the University of Florida and shipped a trunkload of books to Key West. This was right on the heels of the big 1935 hurricane, and everything was washed out. In order to get to Key West, we had to take about 3 different ferries. Coming across the waters, seeing eventually a few lights in the distance. It was such an exotic feeling to me to be this thing out in the middle of the ocean. They were having a ball, they had no money and very little food and no jobs, but they were really enjoying life. Above all, I was taken by the influence of the Cuban Hispanic culture. It was, a way of looking at life and living life that didn't exist on the mainland. Went to Woolworths one day, and there's a girl behind the counter selling candy. I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I decided I'd better marry her quickly before someone else did. She lived at 1210 Duval Street. This was right across the street from where Mario Sanchez, the painter-sculptor of Key West, a little one-page contract hiring me as his sales agent. He wanted me to go out to the restaurant. I think he sold the first one for $3.50. I came back some decades later, and he said to me, you should have stuck around. Yeah, we could have done some things.
Everybody had fish here. In fact, there was a saying that if you went to visit some people at their home and they saw a very tragic situation where there was nothing, they say in Spanish, ni pescado frito. Ni pescado frito means not even fish. That meant that was the end of the world. Because that's one thing everybody could have here. Fish was abundant and available.
Go fishing and probably catch a dozen or more fish. This way there was meals, and we would share it with the neighbors. The neighbors, they may have something we didn't have, or we have something they didn't have. And especially when it came down to sweets.
Yeah, I was happy to be going fishing and bring home meat for the table.
And a lot of people, I'm sure, did subsist on grits and grunts, but as I said, we were fortunate.
On Truman and Center where the laundry is, there was a Chinese guy. He had a store there, and there he had the chickens alive in the coops, You go there and pick out which one you want, and you tie the leg, you carry it home, you kill it and cook it.
You could go down to Elizabeth Street where the fishermen were there at the docks. They had their little boats and they had the wells, you know, that was down in the water. I'd been with her and Mr. Peter Roberts, and she would say, I want that one, and I want that one.
That's when we had some dinner. Most of the time we have fish, crawfish, or sefinica, because right there in the high school, where the high school is now, that used to be full of sefinica, blue crabs. We used to have Mexican chilao, little chilao, and we used to eat it with rice or with bread. And well, that's how we were raised in Key West.
And they did have the WPA and the food lines that my dad would go and we'd get powdered milk and dried food.
The government used to pass out staples for the local residents who didn't have any money to buy, and they would give out sugar, cream, beans.
They didn't have no meat or anything, it was just cornmeal. And I remember dried peaches. They had a big batch of dried peaches, sun-dried. They gave it to everybody. Raisins and prunes, dried.
We'd get turtle. She would get turtle for stewing.
You know how they take the vegetables and they section them off when they're not that great or they break off? She says, go and tell Fausto you want a big bag of mixed vegetables. So I'd come home with a big bag of fresh vegetables for 25 cents. And Mama would fix a big pot of vegetable soup, which was excellent.
I remember somebody telling me that during the Depression you had a bread sandwich, a piece of bread between two slices of bread.
Grits and grunts with an egg on top. That used to be one of the best flavors you ever had over in Key West. I used to like that better than a steak now.
We had the cistern where we had to drink water, even with tadpoles in it.
We had a cistern, and yes, and every so often in the dry spells, we would be short of water. Sometimes things fell in it, and we never knew until we started looking, like roaches, like bugs, like a rat once in a while. And we had an outhouse. We had a bathhouse too outside. Once in a while we ran out of water and would start yelling for water to take the soap off of us.
They used a Sears Roebuck catalog because it saved toilet paper money. So every outhouse had a Sears Roebuck catalog.
We didn't even have screens in our house. We smoked the mosquitoes out. My grandma used to burn old rags in a coffee can and go through the house.
You have to leave the windows open for the breeze, and then the mosquitoes would come in.
I used to fan my babies with a piece of cardboard. The majority of the time, as she said, we would just lay there in our perspiration all night long. But we didn't know any different.
On hot nights, there was no air conditioning, of course. Young people especially would just grab their pillow and blanket and head for South Beach, the county pier, which went way out into the ocean. And if the breeze was blowing in from the ocean and the mosquitoes were blown inshore away from the people, and somebody would bring a guitar and somebody would bring wine, and some would stay up all night singing and drinking wine and whatnot. And I suppose some of the others under the blankets making love.
Down in Comptown, down there, they would have what they called cut-ups. I think they would get raw potatoes and sour oranges and cut them up. And
yeah, we used to go there on our street to my cousin's, Henrietta Ranger. We'll each take something like an apple or banana or some kind of fruit. We had fruit cut-ups.
We all played together, the black and the white kids. You take John Spotswood, the old man. Sometimes his mother used to come down looking for him, and my mother said, leave them alone, they got three and they're all upstairs sleeping.
Played marbles on the sidewalks.
with all the black children and white children together.
Gregory, Richard Hemingway's son, he and I used to shoot marbles together, right there in the yard.
The best thing that I remember growing up in Key West is the mornings in the summer where we used to ride our bikes to the Navy Yard and go swimming. We would take Southard going into where Pritam Singh's place is now. We'd get up in the morning about 5:30 or 6 o'clock, swim until about 8 or 9, come home and get a big Cuban bread and a milkshake, and we'd eat the whole thing because we were so hungry.
Oh, my bicycle. When I got a bicycle, I thought I was in heaven.
We'd go to the forest hunting for birds with the BB gun. And there was a lot of forest.
It was like musical chairs, really. But that was a lot of fun to be out there at night, you know, in the summer. And Mama used to sit on the porch.
Kites. We'd come back from school and fly kites.
About 7 years old. And I started with 10 cents a week with Juan Lopez. He put me to 25 cents, then he put me to 50 cents. Then he put me to $1. When he put me to $1, I thought I was the president from the United States.
I also used to peddle avocados on the streets with a cart. My part on the sale was 25%. If I sold $2, I would get 50 cents. They used to sell for 10 cents a piece. You had to sell 20 avocados to sell $2.
Only one time in my life, I went to steal. I want to get some fish and sell it to the aquarium. And I ain't had a penny to buy no hooks. And I went to 5 and 10 on Crest on the Wall Street in front of the Concha Hotel. And I saw the window. They used to have a little glass on top. And that day they had the glass on top. So I did like that with my hand. I went to the street. I went out there and get the fish, and I went back to the aquarium and sell them there for 10 cents a piece.
I used to go to the little ponds to get blue crabs. And I'd go there and to Bertha, and there was an area that had been dredged. It was like a peninsula going out. I showed it to you once. And I'd go to the end of the peninsula and go out and walk along the shoreline. And I used to get these blue crabs. I used to call them sea finickies. And I would sell them for 25 cents a dozen. I had a place that was buying from me on the corner of Parker and Truman. There was a full restaurant there, La Tomasita. The owner was Chicho, and he used to cook there for the gamblers. Yeah, little snacks, make a stew, enchilado they call that, and then a couple of loaves of bread, and dip them in there, be gambling in there. That was my customer. But it was better than nothing at that time. It was better to make 75 cents by selling 3,000 crabs and have nothing.
Hooray, Spanish limes, got them sweet, like a piece of turkey meat, we used to say. And they were sweet too, they were real good. We would do that till the tree was almost clean.
A man used to come up this street here selling fish in a cart, calling out his wares, and everybody would run to the front door and buy whatever they wanted in the way of fish.
Okay, Miss Edna Kemp, she sold ice cream on Sundays, but you had a churn. Very, very tasty.
Oh, the black woman used to make the best coconut candy. Oh yes, cheap too. We used to put our order in, you know, like so many pieces for 5 cents.
Oh yeah, she was popular too. So candy on Sunday, she made Benny cake, peppermint candy. Oh Lord, what was her name? She was, on Sunday it was crowds of people go there. And that I think Benny candy called it, was very good. No, she sold it right for, you went to her house. On Sunday, after Sunday school, Miss Money, the lady that made the candy, Miss Money.
There was a lady named Miss Money who used to make glass candy up by the cemetery. And then on Petronia Street, there was a lady, Miss Leela Thompson, used to make cakes and pies and candies. And on Elizabeth Street was a lady named Miss Laurette Kemp used to make cakes and pies. They used to sell them around.
My mama used to buy some shoes from him and 15 cents and quarter. He had a bicycle with a little box, and he used to go around the street say, Titi Mayaya, Titi Mayaya. And the people, oye Mayaya, come, oye Mayaya. And that's the way he used to do long time ago. No, the only thing he used to say, coño tu madre, coño tu madre. That's what he used to say. That's true. That's the story he had. He could be any place, and that's a word he used to say in front of anybody. Because he had that thing that he had to say it.
The Tourette's.
But he was, right, but he was a nice guy.
Oh, Miss Carrie Woods across the street. She could have made the best pigeon peas and rice, fried fish, comforters.
The Peter Lee man, yes, Gregorio Valdez. He would make these little cone-shaped candies, different flavors.
Leela Thompson. She had like a big, some kind of container, and it was made up of pigtails and pig feet and chitlins. And I don't guess she put chitlins in it though. They'll bring their pot out or their bowl and put the sauce in it. And she usually, like I say, she made what they call potato bread. And she would sell bread, and she did pretty good on that. And we did that every Saturday. Every Saturday, she'd give me a little money.
Oh yes, that's what kept us alive and give us strength to go on.
There was no house that didn't have a lime. You could always have lemonade. You always had lime juice to put on your fish. At one time, we also had a sugar apple tree, unknown.
We had a lime tree, naturally. We had a soursop tree. We had this beautiful sapodilla tree, which must be 50 years old. And we had coconut trees.
We had tamarinds, we had figs, we had Spanish limes and avocado.
They had a lot of fruit around here that you don't see now. They're extinct. Like we had sugar apples, Jamaica apples, tamarinds, sapodillas, and you know how they see these fruits now. Guavas, that's another one. You remember guavas?
Oh, sapodilla, you wasn't a real conch if you didn't have a lime tree.
In the front yard of that home was a sapodilla tree, and then to the side of the Fogarty property was a real sizable sea grape.
My neighbor across the street, he had sugar apples was the size of a large orange, and he cut the tree down to put the fence. And I told him I ought to put the fence up for him if he'd have left the tree there.
I had some uncles who had a little property over on Catherine Street where they grew. They had sapodillas, they had soursop, they had sugar apple, they had all those things, and I used to take them and sell them to your grandfather to make ice cream.
And I remember when Jesus Carmona had his little ice cream parlor next to the Cuban Club.
And that was the best ice cream I've ever had. My uncle used to bring his family down for vacation, and that's where they wanted to go. They went every night.
The highlight of my day was always to go to Jesus Carmona's El.
Saturday nights, if you went to the movies, that was the place that you ended up going.
We didn't have no problem, but I've seen kids go to school with a piece of Cuban bread, and that was lunch.
Before I went to Harris School, in my elementary school, I went to the San Carlos for lunch. We used to go out in the backyard, and they would sit us all around these picnic tables, all of these kids, and in the center of each table was a large pot of some kind of a soup. And then someone would come and bring you a piece of Cuban bread with butter on it.
For lunch, we used to go to San Carlos to the school. I remember Ramonin used to bring the soup at 12 o'clock. And then Luis Gonzalez used to have a little bread named coquitas. We used to eat that with the soup. On Fridays, he used to make some fish soup. On Thursday, he used to make white bean soup. Then on Wednesday was what you call a chicharo soup, a little green thing, a small one, chicharo. And then fabada, haba.
We didn't have, at that time, when I grew up, we didn't have a lunchroom. When you got home for lunch, you had to go to the grocery store and maybe get 10 or 15 cents worth of, we used to call it at that time, spice ham. And we'll get a sandwich and run back, so it was kind of exciting.
Going to high school on White Street, my mom would pack me a lunch, and I'd pack a fishing line. So we had 1 hour for lunch, and I'd hop on the bike, go to the end of White Street before the pier was built, and I'd fish off the little seawall.
When I first arrived, I was startled at 2 or 3 a.m., terrible screams, and it sounded like some woman being gang raped or something. And when I inquired, I was told it was just Hemingway's peacock.
Shine, he lost one eye, I think. He got a prickle from a lime tree, and they had to take his eye out, but still he would box. And he'd knock Hemingway out 2 or 3 times. You should see the people. The people would come out over to the Blue Heaven to watch Hemingway and Shine fight.
I used to hang around the docks, the Curry Sun docks, especially where I met Hemingway for the first time. His boat was there, where the galleon is at now. The only boat painted in black was his. Nobody liked black at that time, but he did.
My cousin, he worked for Hemingway. Jimmy Smith, he worked for years for Hemingway. They used to go out sport fishing and come in back of the Castle Marina, and they would give the fish to the people.
As a 19-year-old would-be writer, skinny kid, too shy to try to meet Hemingway more than just sit on a stool in Sloppy Joe's. Everyone knows one stool had reserved for Ernest Hemingway. No one knew just when he would arrive, so it was very good business for Sloppy Joe's. So he would usually wait toward the end of the day and pretend to scribble a few notes at the bar, and that made everybody happy. And then he'd jump in his Jeep and drive around back, and the owner would load a few cases of stuff onto his Jeep.
The time that I mainly was talked some few words with him was at the salt ponds on Bazo Street, where he used to go to practice with his shotgun, with a man whose name was Toby Bruce.
In Sloppy Joe's one day said, look, you guys tell me some stories. I need to write a pot boiler. I need to make some money right quick. And so they started telling these rum running stories. Then there came a day when this rum runner said, look, I'm tired of telling you all this stuff. I got a load hidden underwater up at Sugarloaf Key, and I could use some help bringing it up. So Hemingway went out as an apprentice rum runner. The rum runner told me, he said he was good at bringing it up. You're diving down, bringing up the demijohns of rum and crates of liquor. Some member of the family woke us up and said, Uncle So-and-so's I landed another load of rum on South Beach. So everybody jump up and got to help unload the boat and put it in his car. So things like that were happening all the time.
In those days, they used to bet 50 cents, $1, and everything. Then it was much money because everybody was poor.
The cockfights, of course, were a very prominent part of Key West life. Every Sunday, you could tell it was 2 o'clock by seeing the men just coming out of all the streets, going down toward the cockfighting ring was just quite close to the Cuban Club. So the domino playing stopped and they all went to the cockfight. I went, and occasionally Hemingway was there. The state legislator, what was his name? Bernie Pappy was there with his brother.
They gave the roosters to Julio Santa Cruz, Gil Garcia, Guajirito, Leslie, Juan de Dios, and Jose Machin, and Georgie.
The bird was, he was down and out, but still trying to fight. They'd say, save him, So the owner would jump in, and he'd had some aloe, and he'd hold the bird's mouth open and put it down his throat and make him swallow it. And it worked so well, the bird jumped right up and wanted to fight some more.
Around this area was called a sporting area. I do remember that much. They would go to Georgia and places and get these young girls from the country, pay them atomic, bring them to Key West to give them a job. And they'd use them as prostitutes.
Did they know they were going to be prostitutes?
No, they told me they had a business to come bring her for a job. And the one was over there, it's hard to remember, Ruby. It's a big, tall woman with the empty lot is. Over here with the big houses to the corner of Howe and Julia. Those ones, Alice Reed. Now remember, she brought 2 young women from Georgia. They were sisters. And one finally got away. Somehow she got away and she married a guy here. And then on 4th Street, along the corner where Ford and Truman, there was another one. I don't know who that was, what her name was. And sometimes you'd hear the girls up there crying, they've been, taken advantage of. didn't know they would come that kind of lifestyle. And one was killed up there. And I think to this day, they don't know who killed her. And it was found. They brought her down. They came down and brought her down the back stairs and carried her somewhere.
This matter of the physical Key West is still here, but the people who created the old Key West are long gone. This is something that's no doubt irreversible. Those people are not coming back. And the culture we're talking about, the lifestyle, will probably never exist again. You can't restore it the way you did the buildings.
And I never changed the old days for now for $1 million. Because the old days, good old days, was the best in the whole world in Key West.
It was a very joyful bringing up, even though the Depression was there and we may not have had as much food to eat and material things, but we had so much love. And I think that that's what really brought us through the Depression, is the stability of the family and the love of our parents.
It's astonishing, but I'd like to remind you that Key West is unique, and I don't think you can find any other place like Key West in the United States.